Bajigur Wedang Ronde. I'm Gary Wiryawan. Today I want to talk about my experience of shooting street photography using Micro Four Thirds camera, specifically my Panasonic cameras. I'm not a full-time photographer, so please treat this video merely as a suggestion or opinion. First, let me begin my approach on street photography. So I shoot street photography mostly as part of my travel photography when I go somewhere. So because of that, I want my pictures not only to look pretty, but also to tell a good story, especially a story that relates to what happened during my travel. That means a lot of environmental, candid portraits of people on the street. I also choose to shoot candid only because I want it to be natural and undisruptive to the scene. There are times when I want to shoot street photography with pose subject when the scene is suitable. So now that brings us to the gear. I'm gonna sound very cliche right now, but ultimately gear does not matter. All of these photos that I'm about to show to you can be taken using any modern digital camera. They will still, in essence, be true to what their intended purposes are, even with slight difference of color, quality, and also the look. However, I personally choose Micro Four Thirds cameras as my main platform because it suits my need the best. Now, I am fully aware of all the compromises of the Micro Four Thirds platform. However, even the best, most expensive camera in the world is still a compromise of something. So it's just a matter of finding the right compromises for you and stay with that platform. Now with my Panasonic GX8. I usually use the Lumix 12 to 35mm f2.8 for all my needs, including landscapes, street photography, portraits, and other stuff. For street photography, I usually have the focal length set before I even turn on the camera. If I want to take a street photography of something that's really wide with a lot of scenery, I usually set it to 12mm. For slightly normal classic look of street photography, I usually set it to 18mm. And for slightly far away shot and for slightly better subject isolation, I will usually shoot at 25mm. Finally, if it's a close-up or if it's a really far away shot, I will go to 35mm. For so many years, I shoot in aperture priority mode, and I always enjoy the result of using the aperture priority. I usually set the ISO to auto, and then I usually also set the autofocus point to be single on the middle so I can just focus and recompose. However, I've been experimenting with using shutter priority mode recently, especially during daytime or under bright light, so I can freeze the motion and have less motion blur. In conjunction to that, I also set the autofocus to 49 points and just let the camera decide on which place to focus, so I can just really focus on composition and just taking the shot. A few notes. Sometimes I also set my ISO manually before I shoot, depending on the lighting situation. However, I don't mind setting my ISO to auto, especially when I'm shooting on a place where the lighting changes constantly. I also exclusively use electronic shutter when shooting street photography, so I can be inconspicuous when I'm shooting. I often shot using the LCD, but sometimes when I want to focus really hard on something, I will shoot using the viewfinder. Okay, now that I already explained some of the technical things about the camera, I also want to explain about some visual aspect elements of the photography that makes it pretty and storytelling. As I mentioned earlier, I want my photographs to be able to have that storytelling abilities to them. This means that the picture taken must have some elements and information that will help for it to speak for itself. But at the same time, I also want my pictures to be pretty because I want to visually attract the viewer of my photographs. So we have these two things happening at the same time in my photograph: storytelling and pretty. In order for the picture to have that storytelling ability, I always look for some detail in the picture that can tell information of time, of place. For example, if someone wears a fancy clothing or if it's a shopping building with a fancy glass or fancy display, some pretty walls, some street signs that tells where it is, things like that. Those details that I mentioned hopefully will help the picture to be able to tell a little story about my travel and also help me to relate with my picture to recall my memory about it. They should ultimately bring some sense of place and time in the picture. Now moving to the pretty side. In order to make the picture look pretty, I always want some ingredients in my picture to be present. First, I want the composition to balance between the subject and the scenery behind it so that they don't overpower each other. For placement of subject, I usually stick with rule of thirds. Then, I also look for movement in my shot, especially like moving legs, but sharp torso and sharp head. Lighting is very important. I decide whether I want contrasty light or flat light depending on the mood of my photographs. And I try to get the best lighting possible for my picture. I want to be inconspicuous, so I don't use flash, I just shoot with natural light. Then, the color also needs to pop. I always look for some clothes with spatial color that contrast the background really well. As for the subject, I want as few people as possible to perform as the subjects. Usually I limit only 1 to 3 persons. If there happen to be a crowd in the background, I usually don't mind as long as the background doesn't really overpower the main subject. Okay, some final points. The GX8 is an almost perfect camera for street photography. There are only 2 drawbacks of this camera. First is its rather large size, and second is this swivel screen that flips. Let me first talk about this swivel screen. When you shoot street photograph, you sometimes want to shoot low angle, and with the GX8, the only option is to flip it out like this and then turn the screen like this to get the low angle shot like this. However, now the camera is slightly inconspicuous because there's this screen that comes out from the body, making the camera looks very large and noticeable. I personally don't mind having this swivel screen like this because in reality, when I shoot street photography, I don't take out the screen like that. I just keep it on the body tucked in like that, and then I just shoot using the LCD or sometimes the viewfinder. The swivel screen doesn't really serve a purpose on street photography, but when it comes to video and landscape, this is very helpful. So I'm actually glad that the GX8 has this swivel kind of screen. Now moving on to the size of the body. The GX8 size is pretty big, but it's actually not that much bigger from the older GX7 or the GX8580. I also need to address why I shoot with zoom lens instead of prime lens. Many street photographers are actually against using zoom lens like this. They prefer using a prime lens that's small and compact, like this 20mm f1.7 that's really small and compact and sharp. However, when I travel, sometimes I don't really know what I'm about to get, and using zoom lens like this actually makes shooting easier. Also, I treat my zoom lens almost like a bunch of prime lens on a single lens. As I mentioned earlier, I usually set up the zoom lens before I even turn on the camera, before I even take the shot. In other words, I pre-visualize what I want to shoot before I even turn on the camera. So that means I have to choose the focal length beforehand, and thus thinking a little bit like using prime lens. Regarding how I take the shots, I have evolved from shooting a bunch of pictures using the burst mode and then selecting only a few of the good ones to a slower 1 or 2 shots of a scenery that I want to take by pre-visualizing my shot. I mean, with digital, it's okay to shoot many pictures using the burst modes and then selecting only a few of the good ones and then deleting the rest. You have no risk doing that, and even some of the best photographers in the world do that as well. But I've been enjoying this process of slowing down, thinking about my shots, and then waiting for the right moment to happen and take the shot. So yes, that's weird because on the Panasonic GX8, there's that 4K photo mode with very fast burst and then high buffer and all that. But for me, while it's nice to have that mode, and I actually used it already a few times, I actually choose the GX8 because of its fast autofocus and also overall fast performance of the camera. I mean, I can just turn it on, take the shot, and I got the shot already. So while this whole process of pre-visualizing the shot, slowing down, and then take the shot only when the moment happens it seems like counterintuitive, it actually feels more rewarding to me as a photographer. So that's all for today's video. I hope you find this video to be useful. Please like, share and subscribe. Also, don't forget to check my Instagram and also my photography blog. Link in the description below. So thanks and goodbye.